Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Welcome home, stranger. The rain hammered against the windshield as Staff Sergeant Robert Bobby Sullivan pulled into the driveway of what used to feel like home. 15 months in Afghanistan, and before that, 6 months dealing with his mother's deteriorating health via video calls and worried text messages. When the call came that she'd passed, the Army granted him emergency leave to handle the funeral and settle her affairs. Now, at 42, Bobby had decided to take early retirement. 20 years of service, 3 deployments, and a chest full of commendations. He'd given enough. His plan was simple. Come home, be a father to Trevor and Jessica, and maybe salvage what was left of his marriage to Linda after years of distance and deployment strain. The house looked different. New garden lights lined the walkway, and there was a sleek black BMW in the driveway he didn't recognize. Linda had mentioned getting a new car, but this looked expensive, more than they could afford on her teacher's salary and his military pay. Bobby grabbed his duffel bag and approached the front door. Strange, the lock felt different when he inserted his key. After some fumbling, it finally turned. The foyer was darker than he remembered, with new furniture and a scent he couldn't place. Something sweet and unfamiliar. Linda? Kids? His voice echoed through the house. Trevor appeared at the top of the stairs. At 17, his son had grown taller, broader. The kid Bobby remembered as eager to hear war stories now looked down at him with something resembling contempt. "Oh, you're back." Trevor's tone was flat, unwelcoming. "Yes, son. I'm home for good this time." Bobby forced a smile. "Where's your mom?" "Out with friends." Trevor descended the stairs slowly, deliberately. "Look, we need to talk about some ground rules while you're here." "While you're here." The words hit Bobby like a slap. Ground rules. Jessica emerged from the kitchen, now 15 and barely recognizable. She'd always been Daddy's little girl, but the young woman standing before him regarded him like a stranger. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Hey, sweetheart." Bobby moved to hug her, but she stepped back. "Trevor's right," Jessica said. "Things are different now. We've been managing fine without you." Bobby felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I'm your father. This is my house." "Actually," Trevor said, pulling out his phone, "Mom's been paying all the bills, and we've established some boundaries that work for our family." "Our family? I'm part of this family." Trevor walked to the bathroom, and Bobby heard the distinct sound of a deadbolt being installed. When his son emerged, he was holding a new key. "We need boundaries. The bathroom is off limits unless you ask permission first." Bobby stared at his son, disbelief washing over him. "You changed the locks on the bathroom?" "Among other things." Trevor pocketed the key. "Also, mealtimes are scheduled. If you want to eat with us, you need to ask. We've gotten used to our routine." The rain continued to pound outside, and Bobby felt as though he was still standing in it. Cold, exposed, unwelcome. What the hell happened to this family? Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway, stirring something in a pot. "Soup from the smell of it." "He's right, Dad. You're not really a guest here, but you're not. Well, things have changed. It might be awkward if you just assumed everything would go back to how it was." The words hung in the air like smoke. Bobby looked between his children, these strangers wearing familiar faces, and felt the first stirrings of something he'd learned to recognize in combat zones. The feeling that came just before everything went to hell. "Where's your mother?" he asked again. "Book club," Jessica said quickly. "She'll be back late." At 11 p.m., Bobby sat alone in the living room when Linda finally came home. She smelled like wine and that same unfamiliar cologne he'd noticed in the foyer. Her hair was different, styled in a way that took effort. Her clothes were newer, more expensive. "Bobby," she didn't seem surprised to see him. "I wasn't sure when you'd get back." 3 days ago, I called and told you I'd be home tonight." Linda set down her purse and avoided his eyes. "Right. Well, you look good. Tired but good." He studied his wife of 19 years. Something fundamental had shifted. The way she held herself, the way she looked at him, or rather, didn't look at him. "Linda, what's going on here?" "The kids are treating me like a stranger." They're protecting themselves, Linda said quietly. You've been gone a lot, Bobby. More than you've been here. They've learned to depend on each other, on me. It's not personal. Not personal? Bobby stood up. My son changed the locks on the bathroom and told me I need permission to eat. How is that not personal? Linda finally met his eyes, and what he saw there was worse than anger. It was indifference. Maybe you should sleep in the guest room tonight, until we figure things out. The guest room, in his own house. Bobby nodded slowly, filing this moment away in the same mental compartment where he kept track of enemy movements and threats to be dealt with later. Sure, he said, just until we figure things out. As Linda headed upstairs, Bobby noticed she was texting someone. The soft smile on her face as she typed was one he remembered, but it hadn't been directed at him in years. Chapter 2. The New Normal. The next few weeks established a routine that felt more like psychological warfare than family life. Bobby woke each morning in the guest room to the sounds of his family going about their business without him. Trevor and Jessica had perfected the art of civil indifference, speaking to him only when necessary and treating his requests like impositions. The bathroom situation was the most humiliating. Every time he needed to use it, he had to find Trevor or ask Linda for the key. Sometimes they were busy or didn't hear him. He'd started using the half bath in the basement, a cramped space that smelled of mildew and felt more like a prison cell. Meals were worse. The family ate together at specific times, and Bobby was expected to ask if he could join them. When he did, conversation died. When he didn't, he'd find the kitchen cleaned and put away, forcing him to fend for himself. This is temporary, Linda kept saying when he confronted her. We just need time to adjust. But Bobby had spent 20 years reading hostile territory, and this wasn't adjustment, this was occupation. His own family had taken control of his home and were systematically making him unwelcome. The financial picture was becoming clearer too. Linda had indeed been paying the bills, but from accounts Bobby didn't have access to. His military pension and savings had been rerouted to new accounts he hadn't opened. When he asked about it, Linda produced papers he didn't remember signing. You gave me power of attorney before your last deployment, she explained, showing him documents that looked legitimate. For emergencies, I've been managing everything. Bobby examined the papers. His signature looked right, but he had no memory of signing them. The dates were from 18 months ago, during a particularly difficult period when his mother's health was declining and he was dealing with combat stress. It was possible he'd signed them and forgotten, but something felt wrong. More unsettling were the changes in the house itself. New furniture, new electronics, renovations to the kitchen and master bedroom. When Bobby calculated the costs, they far exceeded Linda's teaching salary. My father left me some money, Linda explained when he questioned the expenses. But Bobby knew Linda's father was still alive and hadn't spoken to his daughter in years. Then there was the BMW in the driveway. When Bobby asked to borrow it for a job interview, Linda claimed it was a lease through the school district for teachers who drove to multiple campuses. But Bobby had checked with 2 other teachers from Linda's school, and no such program existed. The breaking point came 3 weeks after his return. Bobby had been applying for civilian jobs, but his military skills didn't translate easily to the suburban job market. The interviews were going poorly, partly because he was staying in hotels near the interview locations rather than commuting from home. Linda insisted the guest room was too disruptive for him to have a good night's sleep before important meetings. When Bobby returned from a particularly discouraging interview in the city, he found suitcases in the foyer. We're going to visit my sister in Colorado, Linda announced. 2 weeks. Jessica has never seen the mountains, and Trevor could use the break before senior year. Great, Bobby said. When do we leave? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Trevor and Jessica exchanged glances with their mother. Actually, Linda said carefully, we thought you might want to stay here. To job hunt. Use the quiet time to get settled. Bobby felt that familiar combat zone sensation again. You're going on a family vacation without me. It's not a vacation, it's without me, Bobby repeated. Linda's facade of concern dropped slightly. Bobby, you've been gone for most of their lives. They need some space to process your being back. And frankly, so do I. Trevor stepped forward. Plus, someone should watch the house. Jessica nodded, still stirring soup at the stove. Always stirring something, that kid. We'll bring you back something nice. Bobby looked at his family, really looked at them. This wasn't about adjustment or space or processing. This was about removing him entirely. How long have you been planning this trip? We booked it last month, Linda said. Before we knew exactly when you'd be back. Last month. Bobby nodded. Before you knew I'd taken early retirement and was coming home permanently. Right. But Bobby had called Linda 6 weeks ago to tell her about his retirement decision and his mother's worsening condition. He called again 4 weeks ago to update her on the funeral arrangements. And 3 weeks ago to confirm his travel home. They had planned this vacation knowing he'd be here. They had planned to leave him behind. When do you leave? He asked quietly. Tomorrow morning, Trevor said. Early flight. We'll leave you some money for groceries, Jessica added, as if that made it better. And we're taking the BMW, Linda said. There's a rental car waiting at the airport, but obviously we can't leave the car there for 2 weeks. Bobby felt something shift inside him, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. Obviously, the keys to your truck are in the kitchen drawer, Linda continued. But honestly, you should probably just stay local. Save money on gas while you're job hunting. They were taking the car keys. All of them. Even to his own truck that he'd paid for with his military savings. Just to be safe, Trevor added, reading his father's expression. Mom's worried about the insurance if something happened while we're away. Bobby nodded slowly. Sure. Makes sense. That night, as his family finished packing for their trip, Bobby sat in the guest room and made a decision. For 20 years, he'd followed rules of engagement. He'd shown mercy to enemies who surrendered. He'd protected civilians and followed the laws of war. But this wasn't war. This was betrayal. And Bobby Sullivan had never been good at forgiving betrayal. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Old Army buddies who owed him favors. Military contacts who worked in civilian intelligence now. People who understood that some situations required a different kind of operation. If his family wanted to play games, Bobby would show them what it meant to face someone who'd spent 2 decades learning how to break enemy strongholds. The gloves were coming off. Chapter 3. What I Did Next. Bobby watched from the guest room window as the taxi pulled away, carrying his family to the airport. Linda had left exactly $43 on the kitchen counter, enough for maybe a week of basic groceries if he was careful. The refrigerator contained half a gallon of milk, some condiments, and leftovers from meals he hadn't been invited to share. They had taken all the car keys, including his truck keys, just as Linda promised. But what they hadn't counted on was Bobby's particular set of skills and the network he'd built over 20 years of military service. The first call was to Sergeant Major Rick Howell, now working private security in Denver. Bobby fucking Sullivan. Rick's voice boomed through the phone. Heard you retired. What's the situation? I need surveillance on my family. They're flying into Denver this morning. I'll send you their info. Roger that. What are we looking for? Everything. Who they meet, where they go, who my wife calls. Full package. Copy. How deep do you want me to dig? Bobby looked around the empty house, thinking about the BMW, the mysterious income, the power of attorney he didn't remember signing. All the way to bedrock. The second call was to Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, now working for a private investigation firm in D.C. Bobby, good to hear from you. I heard about your mom. I'm sorry. Thanks, Pat. I need a full financial workup on my wife. Banking, credit, income sources, the works. Plus, I need these documents analyzed. He photographed the power of attorney papers and sent them over. How fast do you need this? Yesterday. I'll have preliminary results by tonight. The third call was to Marcus Webb, a tech specialist who'd served under Bobby in Afghanistan and now ran a cybersecurity firm. Captain Sullivan, what can I do for you? I need complete digital surveillance on my family. Phone records, social media, email, everything. And I need it done quietly. Legal. Then my family. I'm on all the accounts. Then we're good. I'll set up remote access to everything within the hour. By noon, Bobby had his war room established in the basement. 3 laptops borrowed from Marcus, secure communication links to his team, and a growing file of intelligence on his own family's activities. The first report started coming in around 2 p.m. Rick's surveillance team had followed Linda, Trevor, and Jessica from the Denver airport to the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Not exactly the budget family trip Linda had described. More interesting, they weren't alone. A man had met them at the airport, tall, dark hair, expensive clothes. He'd kissed Linda. Not a friendly peck. A real kiss. Patricia's financial investigation was revealing even more interesting details. Linda had 3 bank accounts Bobby didn't know about, with deposits totaling over $180,000 in the past year. Her teacher's salary was being supplemented by regular payments from something called Torres Development LLC. Bobby ran Torres Development through military databases and business registries. It was a property development company owned by Kevin Torres, a local contractor who'd done work in their neighborhood. Bobby remembered the man vaguely. He'd renovated the Martinez house down the street and several others in the area. By evening, Marcus had broken into Linda's email and social media accounts. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Linda and Kevin Torres had been having an affair for over 2 years. The email chains detailed their relationship, their business arrangements, and their plans for Bobby's return. Kevin had been financing Linda's lifestyle through shell companies and fictitious consulting payments. The BMW was registered to one of Kevin's businesses. But the worst part was the plan they discussed for Bobby's homecoming. They had orchestrated the entire humiliation campaign. Trevor and Jessica weren't naturally hostile. They had been coached. Turned against their father systematically with stories about how Bobby had abandoned them, how he'd chosen the army over his family, how he was dangerous and unstable from his combat deployments. The bathroom locks, the meal restrictions, the guest room, all of it had been Kevin's idea, designed to break Bobby's spirit and make him leave voluntarily. If he couldn't be driven away, the plan was to have him declared mentally unfit and committed to a psychiatric facility. Linda had already consulted with lawyers about having Bobby's military benefits transferred to her permanently. The vacation was the final phase. While they were gone, Kevin would move his things into the house officially. When they returned, Bobby would be presented with divorce papers and told to move out. If he refused, they would claim he was violent and unstable, using his military background against him. Bobby sat in the basement, reading through months of planning his own destruction, and felt something crystallize inside him. Not anger. Anger was hot and stupid. This was something colder, more focused. The same feeling he'd had when planning raids on high-value targets in Afghanistan. His phone rang. Rick, calling from Denver. Bobby, you need to hear this. Our guy with the directional mic caught some interesting conversation over dinner. Bobby listened to the audio recording. Kevin Torres discussing his real estate empire, built largely on fraudulent loans and shell companies. More interesting, Kevin was bragging about his plan to acquire Bobby's house through the divorce proceedings and flip it for a massive profit. There's more, Rick continued. Your wife isn't the only military spouse he's targeted. I've identified at least 3 other cases in the area where deployed servicemen's wives suddenly became interested in expensive renovations and new cars, always with Torres Development doing the work. Bobby felt the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't just adultery. This was a systematic operation targeting military families, using deployed soldiers' absence to manipulate their wives and steal their assets. Rick, I need you to expand the surveillance. Find the other families he's targeted. Give me everything on Torres's business practices, his associates, his vulnerabilities. You planning something, Bobby? Bobby looked around the basement he'd been relegated to in his own home, thought about his children, turned against him by a man who made his living destroying military families. Thought about Linda, the woman he'd loved and protected and served for, now actively plotting his destruction. Yeah, Bobby said quietly. I'm planning something. Chapter 4, Building the Case. Bobby spent the next week transforming his basement exile into a command center that would have impressed his old intelligence officers. The walls were covered with photographs, financial documents, phone records, and relationship maps connecting Kevin Torres to his various schemes. The deeper Bobby dug, the more extensive Torres's operation became. The man wasn't just having affairs. He was running a sophisticated con targeting military families throughout the region. His method was consistent. Identify deployed servicemen with valuable assets, seduce their wives during their absence, manipulate the women into transferring financial control, then either marry them for their benefits or discard them once their resources were exhausted. Patricia's investigation had uncovered 7 other families that fit the pattern. In each case, the wife had suddenly developed expensive tastes during her husband's deployment, always funded by consulting work or family money that traced back to Torres's shell companies. 2 of the marriages had ended in divorce, with the husband losing everything. 3 others were currently in progress. The most heartbreaking case was Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, who'd returned from Iraq to find his wife Emma had drained their savings and sold their house to pay for medical expenses for her sick mother. Emma's mother had been dead for 5 years. The money had gone to fund a lavish lifestyle with Torres while Mike was in combat. When Mike discovered the truth, he'd suffered a mental breakdown and was currently in a VA psychiatric facility. Bobby studied Rodriguez's case file with particular interest. This was exactly what Torres and Linda had planned for him. A combination of financial ruin and psychological manipulation designed to make him appear unstable. The psychiatric commitment would have transferred his benefits permanently to Linda while making it nearly impossible for him to fight back legally. But Torres had made a mistake targeting Bobby Sullivan. The other victims had been junior enlisted men or mid-level NCOs without extensive intelligence training or the kinds of connections Bobby had cultivated. They'd fought alone and lost. Bobby wouldn't be fighting alone. Marcus's digital surveillance was providing real-time intelligence on Torres's activities. The man was currently in Denver, continuing to play the devoted boyfriend to Linda while simultaneously texting with 2 other military wives back home. His pattern was to maintain multiple relationships in various stages, some for immediate financial gain, others being groomed for future exploitation. Even more valuable was the intelligence on Torres's business operations. His real estate empire was built on mortgage fraud, with properties purchased using false information and shell companies. He'd been shifting assets between various LLCs to avoid taxes and creditors, creating a complex financial structure that looked legitimate on the surface but was fundamentally fraudulent. Bobby had called in another favor from his time in Afghanistan, Captain Sarah Morrison, now working for the FBI's white-collar crime division. Without revealing his personal connection to the case, Bobby had provided her with carefully curated evidence of Torres's mortgage fraud and identity theft operations. "This is good work," Sarah had told him during their encrypted call. "Really good. How did you come across this intel?" "Anonymous tip led to some digging," Bobby replied. "How long before you can move on it?" "With evidence this solid? We could have warrants within the week. But I'm curious about your source." This level of detail suggests inside access. Military spouse got suspicious about her husband's sudden wealth. Bobby lied smoothly. Started documenting things before she came forward. The FBI investigation would be the anvil. Bobby was preparing to be the hammer. But first, he needed to deal with his children. Trevor and Jessica weren't just innocent victims in this. They'd actively participated in his humiliation. Bobby had always understood that children could be manipulated, but the level of coordination they'd shown suggested something more than simple coaching. Marcus's digital surveillance had revealed the truth. Both kids were being paid for their cooperation. Torres had set up bank accounts for them, supposedly for college funds, but the deposits correlated directly with Bobby's mistreatment. $500 for the bathroom lock installation, $1,000 for the guest room exile, $2,000 for the vacation exclusion. Torres hadn't just turned Bobby's children against him, he bought them. Jessica's constant soup stirring wasn't nervous energy. She'd been recording conversations on her phone, creating audio evidence of Bobby's unstable behavior that would be used in commitment proceedings. Every time she stirred that pot, she was positioning herself to capture his voice while appearing innocent. Trevor's boundary setting was more sophisticated. The kid had been documenting Bobby's reactions to their treatment, photographing any signs of anger or frustration that could be presented as evidence of violent tendencies. His phone contained dozens of photos of Bobby looking upset, angry, or confused, all taken without his knowledge. They'd been building a case against their own father for money. Bobby felt something die inside him as he reviewed the evidence. The children he'd loved and protected and missed during his deployments had sold him out for college money. There would be no forgiveness for this. Ever. His phone buzzed with a message from Rick in Denver. The surveillance team had captured something interesting at the hotel bar. The audio file Rick sent contained Linda and Kevin discussing their timeline. They would return tomorrow as planned. Bobby would be served with divorce papers immediately, along with a restraining order based on the evidence Trevor and Jessica had collected. If Bobby refused to leave voluntarily, Kevin would provoke a confrontation, record it, and use it to have Bobby committed. The kids did great, Kevin's voice said on the recording. Those photos Trevor got, and Jessica's audio recordings, it's exactly what we need to prove he's unstable. I just feel bad about the kids, Linda's voice replied. Having them lie to their father like that. They're getting paid better than most part-time jobs. Besides, they're old enough to understand their father abandoned them. We're just giving them financial security. Bobby listened to the recording 3 times. Linda's guilt was perfunctory at best. She was more concerned about the money than about destroying her children's relationship with their father. Tomorrow, they would come home expecting to find a broken man ready to surrender. Instead, they would find someone who had spent 2 decades learning how to destroy enemies who thought they were safe. Bobby made his final preparations. The anvil was in place. The hammer was ready to fall. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. Bobby was waiting in the living room when the taxi pulled into the driveway. He'd spent the morning making the house look exactly as Linda expected to find it. Dirty dishes in the sink, unmade bed in the guest room, signs of depression and desperation scattered around for Trevor's cameras to capture. But hidden throughout the house were Marcus's recording devices, Patricia's hidden cameras, and Rick's surveillance equipment operated remotely from Denver. Every word, every action would be documented from multiple angles. Linda entered first, followed by Trevor and Jessica, all looking refreshed and relaxed from their 2-week vacation. They brought suitcases and shopping bags, souvenirs from a trip Bobby had paid for, but been excluded from. Bobby, Linda said, setting down her bags. We need to talk. About what? Bobby kept his voice level, giving Trevor nothing dramatic to photograph. Kevin Torres entered behind them, carrying his own luggage and making no attempt to hide his presence. He was exactly as Bobby had expected, tall, well-dressed, confident in the way men are when they believe they've already won. This is Kevin, Linda said unnecessarily. I think it's time you 2 met officially. Bobby looked at the man who'd been systematically destroying his family for 2 years. Kevin Torres. Torres Development, LLC. I've heard a lot about you. Kevin's confidence flickered slightly. Bobby, right? Linda's told me a lot about you, too. Look, I know this is awkward, but we're all adults here. Are we? Bobby stood up slowly. Because it seems like you've been playing games. With my wife, my children, my home. Trevor stepped forward with his phone ready, but Bobby's tone remained calm, his posture non-threatening. Dad, Kevin's been really good to us while you were gone. I'm sure he has. Bobby looked at his son. How much has he been paying you, Trevor? The question hit like a slap. Trevor's face went white. What? The bank account Kevin set up for you. $7,000 in deposits over the past 6 months. That's pretty good money for a high school student. Jessica stopped stirring the pot she'd automatically gravitated toward and turned around slowly. What are you talking about? Bobby looked at his daughter. Yours has $8,000. A little more because recording conversations is more technically demanding than just taking pictures. Kevin stepped forward, his hand moving toward Bobby in what could be interpreted as an aggressive gesture. Perfect. The cameras caught it all. I think you're confused, Bobby. Maybe you should. Sit down, Kevin. Bobby's voice carried the authority of 20 years commanding soldiers in combat. We're not done talking. Kevin hesitated, clearly trying to decide whether to escalate the situation physically. Bobby hoped he would. It would make things easier. Linda moved between them. Bobby, you're scaring the kids. Am I? Or are they scared because their little con game is falling apart? Bobby looked around at his family. Should I tell them what I know? Or do you want to? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Bobby could see Trevor and Jessica exchanging glances, their confidence evaporating as they realized their father wasn't the broken man they'd expected to find. I know about the financial fraud, Bobby continued. The shell companies, the mortgage schemes, the systematic targeting of military families. I know about the plan to have me committed to steal my benefits. I know about the recording devices and the photographs and the careful documentation of my supposed instability. Kevin's composure cracked completely. You don't know what you're talking about. Rodriguez, Wilson, Patterson, Martinez. Bobby recited the names like a roll call. 7 families you've destroyed so far. Mike Rodriguez is in a psychiatric facility because of you. Emma Wilson lost her kids when her husband came home to find everything gone. Should I keep going? Linda sank into a chair, her face pale. Bobby, I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, Linda. You've been part of it for 2 years. The question is whether you're a victim or an accomplice. Bobby pulled out his tablet and played one of Kevin's recorded calls, the one where he bragged about his operation targeting military wives. Linda's face went from pale to gray as she heard Kevin's voice describing her as another conquest and easier than most because she's so desperate for attention. You son of a bitch, Linda whispered, turning to Kevin. Kevin was backing toward the door, realizing the situation had shifted dramatically. Linda, don't listen to him. He's trying to manipulate you. With your own voice? Bobby played another recording. Kevin discussing how he planned to discard Linda once the house was transferred to his company. Trevor lowered his phone, the fight going out of him. Dad, we didn't know. You didn't know what? That taking money to destroy your father was wrong? That recording him secretly was a betrayal? What exactly didn't you know? Jessica started crying, but Bobby felt nothing. No sympathy, no forgiveness. They made their choice when they chose money over family. Kevin made his move then, pulling out his phone to call someone. This is harassment. I'm calling the police. Good idea, Bobby said. Ask for Agent Sarah Morrison from the FBI field office. Tell her you're Kevin Torres and you'd like to discuss your real estate investments. Kevin's phone call died in his throat. What? The FBI has been investigating Torres development for mortgage fraud. They have warrants ready to execute. All they needed was confirmation that you'd be in town. Bobby smiled for the first time in weeks. I gave them that confirmation this morning. As if summoned by his words, Bobby heard vehicles pulling into the driveway. Multiple vehicles. Car doors slamming. Heavy footsteps on the walkway. The knock on the door was authoritative and unmistakable. FBI, we have a warrant. Kevin Torres's face went white as Bobby opened the door to let in the agents. Agent Morrison was at the front of the team, and she nodded professionally to Bobby before turning to Kevin. Kevin Torres, you're under arrest for mortgage fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The agents moved efficiently, handcuffing Kevin while reading him his rights. Bobby watched with satisfaction as his family's destroyer was led away in shackles. But this was only the beginning. The hammer had fallen, but the anvil still had work to do. Chapter 6: Revelations and Reckonings. With Kevin Torres in federal custody, the house fell into stunned silence. Linda sat on the couch, staring at the spot where Kevin had been arrested. Trevor and Jessica huddled together, both crying now that the reality of their situation was sinking in. Bobby stood by the window, watching the FBI agents search Kevin's BMW. They'd find drugs. Marcus had planted cocaine in the glove compartment using his extensive knowledge of Kevin's daily routines. Not enough to suggest dealing, but enough to add federal drug charges to the financial crimes. Dad, Trevor's voice was small, broken. I'm sorry. We didn't understand what was happening. Bobby turned to face his son. The boy looked young again, stripped of the cocky confidence Kevin had built up in him. You understood enough to take the money. We thought. You thought what? That betraying your father for cash was acceptable? That recording me secretly was just a game. Bobby's voice remained calm, but there was ice in it that made Trevor step back. You built a case to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. For money. Jessica wiped her eyes. Kevin said you'd abandoned us. He said you chose the army over family, and we had to protect ourselves. And that made taking bribes to destroy me acceptable? Linda finally spoke, her voice hollow. Bobby, they're just kids. Kevin manipulated all of us. Bobby looked at his wife with the same cold assessment he'd once reserved for enemy combatants. You've been having an affair for 2 years, Linda. You've been planning to steal my home, my benefits, my freedom. At what point in that timeline were you manipulated into betraying your marriage vows? I was lonely. You were greedy. Bobby cut her off. Kevin's operation worked because you wanted it to work. You wanted the money, the attention, the new lifestyle. The manipulation was just convenient cover for what you already wanted to do. Bobby's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. The financial investigation had revealed even more devastating information. He read it quickly, then looked up at his family. Linda, Kevin has been using you to target other military families. Your teacher contacts, your knowledge of deployment schedules, your access to military spouse social networks. He's been using that information to identify new victims. Linda's face went white. That's not true. Bobby showed her the evidence on his tablet. Email chains where Linda had provided Kevin with information about upcoming deployments, details about other military families' financial situations, even personal problems that could be exploited. Martha Peterson. You told Kevin about her husband's PTSD and their marital problems. He seduced her 6 months later while Tom was deployed to Syria. Susan Wright. You told Kevin about their son's medical bills and financial stress. He targeted her for a real estate investment scam that cost them their house. Linda stared at the evidence of her own complicity, her face crumbling as she realized the extent of her betrayal. Not just of Bobby, but of their entire military community. I didn't know he was using the information like that, she whispered. You gave it to him anyway. You helped him destroy our friends' lives. Bobby's voice was relentless. You're not a victim, Linda. You're an accomplice. Trevor looked at his mother with growing horror. Mom, you help him hurt other families? Linda couldn't answer. The weight of her actions was finally hitting her, and she seemed to be collapsing under it. Bobby felt no sympathy. For 20 years, he'd protected his family, his community, his country. While he was in combat zones defending freedom, his wife had been helping a predator destroy the very families Bobby was fighting to protect. His phone rang. Rick, calling from his surveillance position. Bobby, you need to know, Kevin made some calls from the federal building. We intercepted them. He's got insurance. What kind of insurance? The kind that threatens to expose other people's secrets if he goes down, including yours. Bobby stepped into the kitchen for privacy. What does he have on me? Financial records suggesting you've been using military resources for personal gain. Fabricated evidence, but sophisticated. He's also claiming you threatened him physically and that you've been stalking his business associates. Bobby felt a cold smile spread across his face. Let him try. Every conversation in this house has been recorded. Every action documented. If he wants to play that game, I got better cards. There's more. He's claiming your investigation into his business was conducted illegally. Says you're using military contacts to harass a civilian businessman. I'm a retired civilian who hired legitimate private investigators and reported suspected crimes to appropriate authorities. If he wants to claim otherwise, he'll need evidence. He might have it. Some of the methods Marcus used to access digital information weren't exactly legal. Bobby considered this. Kevin had been more sophisticated than he'd initially assessed. But Bobby had 20 years of experience in operations that required plausible deniability. Rick, did Marcus access any information we couldn't have obtained through legal means? Not really. Phone records are available through subpoena, financial records through court orders, and most of the digital evidence came from accounts Bobby was authorized to access as the spouse. Then we're clean. Kevin can claim whatever he wants, but he'll be claiming it from federal prison. Bobby returned to the living room, where his family was still dealing with the wreckage of their situation. Linda was on her phone, presumably calling her lawyer. Trevor and Jessica were whispering together, probably discussing their legal exposure. Bobby felt nothing for any of them. The man who had loved this family, who had protected them and sacrificed for them, had died during those 2 weeks of systematic humiliation and betrayal. What remained was someone who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. Bobby, Linda said, hanging up her phone. My lawyer says we need to discuss how to handle this situation. for the kids' sake. The kids are accessories to conspiracy and fraud. They took money to participate in a scheme to have me illegally committed. They're lucky if criminal charges are the worst thing that happens to them. Trevor stepped forward. Dad, we'll pay the money back. All of it. And we'll testify against Kevin. Bobby looked at his son. This stranger who shared his DNA, but had sold him out for cash. You'll testify against Kevin because that's the deal the FBI will offer you to avoid prison time. Don't pretend it's about making things right. Jessica found her voice. What do you want from us? The question hung in the air. What did Bobby want? Revenge? Justice? Reconciliation? Bobby looked around at his family, his betrayers, and realized what he wanted was very simple. He wanted them gone. Chapter 7. The Execution. 3 days after Kevin Torres's arrest, Bobby sat in his lawyer's office reviewing divorce papers. Not the papers Linda had planned to serve him, but the ones he was serving her. The documents were thorough, brutal, and entirely legal. You're sure about this? Attorney Margaret Foster asked, reviewing the settlement terms. You're essentially giving up all claim to reconciliation. There won't be any reconciliation, Bobby replied. I want them out of my life permanently. The divorce papers stripped Linda of everything. The house, purchased primarily with Bobby's VA loan and military benefits, would remain his. Linda's accounts, funded through her participation in Kevin's criminal enterprise, were being frozen by federal authorities. Her teacher's pension could be garnished to compensate Kevin's victims once the civil suits began. More importantly, Bobby was demanding sole custody of Trevor and Jessica, with Linda having only supervised visitation. Given their participation in the conspiracy against him and Linda's involvement in crimes affecting military families, family court would likely rule in Bobby's favor. But Bobby had no intention of actually taking custody of his children. He had a different plan for them. Margaret reviewed the custody arrangements one more time. The children will need representation, and Linda will fight this. Let her fight. I have documentation of their conspiracy, audio recordings of their planning sessions, and financial records of the bribes Kevin paid them, plus Linda's own words implicating her in crimes against other military families. Bobby's phone buzzed with an update from Marcus. Kevin Torres had accepted a federal plea deal to avoid life in prison. In exchange for testifying against his network of accomplices and shell companies, he'd serve 15 years minimum. Part of his plea required full financial disclosure and victim compensation. Linda would be named as a co-conspirator in the federal case. Her cooperation in targeting military families, providing intelligence for Kevin's operations, and laundering money through fake consulting agreements made her an essential part of the criminal enterprise. She could face federal charges or accept a plea deal that would include significant financial penalties and probation. Either way, her teaching career was over. Her reputation in the military community was destroyed. Her financial future was ruins. Bobby felt no satisfaction in her destruction, only cold calculation. She had chosen her path when she chose to betray not just him, but the entire community they'd been part of for 20 years. The door to Margaret's office opened and Linda entered with her attorney, David Chun. Linda looked haggard, aged years in just a few days. The stress of Kevin's arrest and the federal investigation was showing. Bobby, she said, her voice tentative, we need to talk about the children. The children who took bribes to build a false case against me? Those children. David Chun leaned forward. My client is willing to discuss financial arrangements and custody sharing. Your client has no financial assets that aren't connected to criminal activity, Margaret replied smoothly. And her involvement in a conspiracy targeting military families makes her unsuitable for custody of military dependents. Linda started crying again. Bobby, please. I know I made mistakes, but they're still your children. Bobby looked at the woman he'd once loved. They stopped being my children when they took money to destroy me. You stopped being my wife when you helped a predator target our friends. The money doesn't matter, Linda said desperately. We can fix this. Family therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. It takes trust, Bobby said quietly. And trust, once broken, can't be repaired. I trusted you with my life, my future, my children. You sold all of it to the highest bidder. David Chun tried another approach. Mr. Sullivan, your wife was manipulated by a sophisticated criminal. She's as much a victim as anyone." Bobby laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Victims don't spend 2 years planning their husband's imprisonment. Victims don't coach their children to betray their father. Victims don't help criminals target other families. Margaret placed a hand on Bobby's arm. "Mr. Sullivan, perhaps we should discuss the specific terms privately with Mrs. Sullivan's counsel." Bobby nodded and stood to leave. As he reached the door, Linda called out to him. "Bobby, what about forgiveness? What about second chances?" Bobby turned back to face her. "I spent 20 years in the military, Linda. I've seen what happens when you give second chances to people who've proven they can't be trusted. They get people killed. We're not in Afghanistan anymore, Bobby. This is family." Bobby felt something cold and final settle in his chest. "No, Linda, we were family. Now you're just another enemy I've defeated." As Bobby left the lawyer's office, his phone rang. Rick, calling with the final piece of intelligence Bobby had been waiting for. "Bobby, we found the other accounts." Kevin had hidden assets in offshore accounts that the FBI missed. About $2 million, probably stolen from victims over the years. "Can we access them?" "Marcus is working on it. But there's something else. Kevin had plans beyond just your family. He was building a network to target military families nationwide. Base housing complexes, deployment support groups, military spouse organizations. He was planning to franchise his operation." Bobby felt rage flicker through his cold calculation. Kevin Torres hadn't just destroyed individual families. He'd been planning to systematically prey on the entire military community. "Rick, I need you to get that information to the FBI. All of it. Already done. But Bobby, there's something you should know. Kevin's been talking to federal agents about some kind of deal. He's claiming he can provide information about other criminal networks targeting military families." Bobby smiled grimly. "Let him talk. Every word he says implicates Linda further and proves the children knew exactly what they were participating in." When Bobby arrived home, Trevor and Jessica were waiting for him in the living room. They looked smaller somehow, younger and more frightened than they had since his return. "Dad," Trevor said, "we need to talk about what happens next." Bobby sat down across from them and studied their faces. These children who had once run to greet him when he came home on leave, who had cried when he deployed, who had written him letters and sent him drawings and counted the days until his return. All of that was gone now, burned away by greed and betrayal. What remained were two strangers who had sold him out for college money. "What happens next," Bobby said quietly, "is that you both learn the consequences of the choices you made." Chapter 8. No Mercy. Bobby's final move came exactly 1 week after Kevin Torres' arrest. He had let Linda, Trevor, and Jessica believe they had time to negotiate, time to plan their defense, time to find some way to minimize the consequences of their betrayal. He wanted them to have hope before he took it away forever. The morning started with a knock on the door. Linda answered to find Agent Morrison and 2 other FBI agents with a search warrant for the house. Not for evidence of Kevin's crimes that had already been gathered. This warrant was for evidence of Linda's conspiracy and the children's participation in the scheme. "Mrs. Sullivan," Agent Morrison said formally, "we have a warrant to search the premises and seize any documents, devices, or materials related to the conspiracy to defraud Robert Sullivan and other military families." Linda's face went white. "I thought Kevin's arrest ended this. Mr. Torres' cooperation has provided us with extensive information about his accomplices. We'll need to speak with you and your children after we execute this warrant." Bobby watched from the kitchen as federal agents systematically dismantled his family's remaining illusions of safety. They seized phones, computers, tablets, and documents. They found the recording devices Jessica had used, the camera equipment Trevor had employed, and the detailed records Kevin had insisted they keep of Bobby's supposed instability. Every piece of evidence they had thought would destroy Bobby now became evidence of their own crimes. Trevor tried to approach his father as agents boxed up his electronics. "Dad, can you make them stop? Can you tell them we were just kids who didn't understand?" Bobby looked at his son with the same expression he'd once reserved for captured insurgents. "You understood enough to negotiate payment rates. You understood enough to coordinate your activities with a criminal conspiracy. You understood enough to document every detail for legal proceedings. We were scared, Jessica added. Kevin said you'd be violent when you came back, that you'd hurt us. And yet you never once tried to warn me about Kevin's presence in my house. You never tried to protect your mother from a dangerous criminal. You only tried to protect the money you were being paid. Agent Morrison approached Bobby. Mr. Sullivan, we'll need you to come in for a formal statement this afternoon. Your cooperation has been invaluable, but we need official testimony for the prosecutions. Bobby nodded. How many prosecutions? Kevin Torres will plead guilty to 19 federal charges. Your wife will face conspiracy charges unless she accepts a plea deal. Your children. Morrison glanced at Trevor and Jessica. Minors who participate in federal conspiracies can be tried as adults if the crimes are serious enough. Linda collapsed into a chair. You're going to prosecute my children? Mrs. Sullivan, your children participated in a conspiracy to defraud a military veteran and commit him to psychiatric care under false pretenses. They documented their activities, accepted payment, and created false evidence. Age doesn't excuse federal crimes of this magnitude. Bobby felt nothing as he watched his family realize the full scope of their situation. No sympathy, no regret, no desire to help them. They had made their choices. That afternoon, Bobby sat in the FBI field office giving his formal statement. The process was familiar. He'd provided intelligence briefings hundreds of times during his military career. The difference was that this time, he was briefing on his own family's crimes. Mr. Sullivan, Agent Morrison said, your wife's attorney has indicated she's willing to provide full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. This would include testifying against her children if they don't accept plea deals. Bobby nodded. Linda will do whatever protects Linda. She's already proven that. What about the children? Are you willing to support some kind of plea arrangement for them? Bobby considered the question. Trevor and Jessica were minors, technically. They had been manipulated by Kevin Torres. A good defense attorney could probably get them reduced charges or even probation. But Bobby remembered the looks on their faces when they'd humiliated him. The casual cruelty in their voices when they treated him like a stranger in his own home. The calculation in their eyes when they counted their blood money. Agent Morrison, Bobby said finally, my children chose to participate in a conspiracy to destroy their father. They weren't forced into it, they were paid for it. They weren't protecting themselves, they were protecting their income stream. So you won't support lenient treatment? I'll support whatever justice demands. If that's adult charges for adult crimes, so be it. When Bobby returned home that evening, he found the house empty except for Linda. Trevor and Jessica had been taken to juvenile holding pending their arraignment. Linda sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the debris of the FBI's search. Bobby, she said without looking up, I've been thinking about what you said, about trust and second chances. Bobby said nothing, waiting. You're right. I can't be trusted. None of us can. We prove that. Linda finally looked at him, her eyes red and hollow. But what I can't understand is how you could be so cold about your own children. Bobby sat down across from her. Those people who lived in this house for the past month weren't my children. My children loved me. My children would never have taken money to destroy me. They're the same people, Bobby. They just made terrible mistakes. No, Linda, mistakes are accidents. What they did was deliberate, calculated, and cruel. They stopped being my children the moment they chose money over family. Linda wiped her eyes. So what happens now? You destroy us all and walk away. Bobby looked around the house he'd fought to protect, that he'd dreamed of returning to during his deployments. It felt empty now, not because his family was gone, but because it had been empty all along. The people he'd loved had died long before he'd come home to discover it. I don't need to destroy you, Linda. You destroyed yourselves. I just documented it. Bobby's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. The offshore accounts had been accessed, and the $2 million Kevin had hidden was being transferred to a victim compensation fund. Additionally, Marcus had discovered evidence of 3 more criminal networks using similar tactics against military families. The information would be passed to federal authorities anonymously. Kevin Torres's operation was just one tentacle of a larger predator network that fed on military families during their most vulnerable moments. Bobby stood up, looking down at the woman who had once been his wife. "I'm going to pack my things. When the house is processed as evidence, you'll need to find somewhere else to live." "Where will you go?" Bobby smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt since coming home. "Somewhere I can build a new life with people who understand the meaning of loyalty." As Bobby packed his belongings, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for reconciliation or forgiveness, but for the future. A future where he would never again make the mistake of trusting people who had proven themselves untrustworthy. His phone rang one final time. "Rick, calling from Denver." "Bobby, it's over. Kevin Torres just accepted a 20-year plea deal. Full cooperation, full victim compensation, and he's giving up everyone in his network." "What about Linda?" "Plea deal for 5 years probation and victim compensation. She'll never teach again, and she'll be paying damages for the rest of her life." "And the kids?" "Juvenile court, but they'll be tried as adults if they don't accept responsibility. Their best option is plea deals with community service and restitution." Bobby felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Justice, finally. "Rick, I need one more favor." "Name it." "Help me disappear." Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Bobby Sullivan sat on the porch of a small cabin in Montana, watching the sun rise over mountains that had never known betrayal. He'd bought the property with money from the sale of his former home. After the FBI released it from evidence, he'd sold it within a week and donated half the proceeds to military family support organizations. The cabin was isolated, peaceful, and exactly what Bobby needed to rebuild his life. He'd taken a job with a private security company that specialized in protecting military families from financial predators. The work was satisfying in a way that went beyond mere employment. He was using his experience to prevent other families from suffering what his had inflicted on him. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, who now worked as Bobby's partner in the security business. Torres' network completely dismantled. 14 arrests, 47 victims compensated. "Your intelligence made it possible." Bobby smiled and set the phone aside. Kevin Torres was serving 20 years in federal prison. Linda was working as a retail clerk to pay victim compensation, her teaching credentials permanently revoked. She'd been disowned by the military spouse community she'd helped Kevin prey upon. Trevor and Jessica had accepted plea deals that included community service and restitution payments. They would graduate high school with federal criminal records and the knowledge that their choices had consequences. Bobby had not spoken to either of them since their arrests. He felt no guilt about any of it. They had chosen their paths when they chose money over family. Bobby had simply ensured their choices had appropriate consequences. A vehicle approached on the mountain road, a Jeep Bobby recognized. Sarah Morrison, the FBI agent who had led the Torres investigation, climbed out and approached the porch. "Bobby," she said, accepting the coffee he offered. "Thought you'd want to know the final numbers." Bobby listened as Sarah detailed the complete dismantling of the predator network that had targeted military families. 63 families have been victimized across 7 states. Kevin Torres' operation had been the largest, but not the only one. The intelligence Bobby had provided had led to the discovery and prosecution of an entire ecosystem of criminals who specialized in exploiting deployed servicemen. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "We've had inquiries from other federal agencies about your analytical work. If you're interested, there are opportunities in the private sector working with law enforcement." Bobby considered the offer. "What kind of opportunities?" "Consulting on cases involving military families. Financial crimes, domestic terrorism, organized conspiracy. Your understanding of how these predators operate could help us prevent future victims." Bobby looked out at the mountains, thinking about the families who might be saved from what his had endured. "I'll consider it." After Sarah left, Bobby sat in the quiet of his new life and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the peace of reconciliation or forgiveness, but the peace of justice served and debts paid. His old life was gone, burned away by betrayal and greed. But from those ashes, he'd built something better, A life based on truth rather than illusion, on earned loyalty rather than assumed devotion. Bobby had learned the hardest lesson of his military career. Sometimes the enemy lives in your own home. But he'd also learned that victory was possible even in the face of ultimate betrayal, as long as you were willing to fight without mercy for what was right. His phone buzzed with another message. This one from Rick, who had moved to Montana to join Bobby's security company. New case just came in. Army Ranger, 3 deployments. Came home to find his family acting strange. Wife says he needs boundaries before he can rejoin the family. Sound familiar? Bobby smiled and reached for his keys. There was work to do. The old Bobby Sullivan, the man who believed in second chances and forgiveness, was dead and buried with his illusions about family loyalty. What remained was someone harder, colder, but infinitely more effective at protecting people who deserve protection. As Bobby drove down the mountain toward his new mission, he felt something that had been missing from his life for months. Purpose. Not the purpose of serving ungrateful people who would betray him at the first opportunity, but the purpose of protecting those who had earned protection and destroying those who preyed on the innocent. Bobby Sullivan had come home from war to find the real enemy waiting for him in his own living room. He defeated that enemy completely and without mercy. Now he was ready to find new enemies to defeat. The war was over. The mission continued. In the rearview mirror, Bobby could see the smoke rising from the valley where his old life had burned. Ahead, the mountain road stretched toward a future built on harder truths and earned trust. Bobby drove toward that future without looking back. Behind him lay the ashes of betrayal. Ahead lay the satisfaction of justice served and the promise that no one would ever again mistake his mercy for weakness. The homecoming was complete. The revenge was finished. The new life had begun. And Bobby Sullivan had never felt more at peace. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.